Hey, welcome, Glenn. Welcome to the podcast. Super excited to have you here. Just for the audience, would you love to introduce yourself for the audience?
Sure. I am a chief financial officer for Sandline Global, and I've been at this company for about a year and a half. This is actually my second legal technology company. I've been in a bunch of industries, though. I've been in the startup space since the year 2000. I've been in everything from telecom to retail to internet streaming audio to now legal technology. And really, I'm a finance guy. I'm a wannabe technologist. I love automation. I've kind of dedicated my career to it. But where I've really spent the bulk of my career is I call it startup to scale up. It's when you have a business that starts out, is doing really well. They don't have a lot of defined processes. They've got to figure out a way they can go from this sort of small business mentality to something that, whether they get funding or their product catches on or whatever M&A activity, that they're ready to scale up quickly. And so I'm sort of down there in the trenches trying to really define processes for small businesses.
Right. Glenn, so just probably talking about modern finance, right? Like that's something that you keep talking about on LinkedIn as well. And I think we came across this analogy saying modern finance could be a game of darts when you don't have the data, and it could be a game of chess when you have the data, right? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's well said. My version of that is it's going from hunch to hypothesis. So certainly the human element is very important in decision making. And the longer you've been in business, the more you've seen similar things, the better your hunch may be. But there's a difference between, I think the world is round versus here's the data that I can prove that the world is round. So I think that what I really preach, so data is very important, but it's also important to have that human element. So what I really like to talk about is data is huge, but you're never going to turn over your decisions just to straight numbers and math the way you would, like, remember those magic 8 balls? You ask a question, you shake it up and turn it over and it gives the answer. You can't rely on data to just do that, but it lets you make better informed decisions. So yeah, when you have the data, the target is more defined, the objective is more defined versus, if you're as bad at darts as I am, it's almost a random toss.
Right. And given today that CFOs rely a lot on the tools, right? Like it's no more just spreadsheets. I think a lot of the tools out there, I mean, a lot of data gets siloed and sits with multiple different tools, so multiple different sheets as well. Like a CFO handle that, Glenn?
Great question, because it's so on the nose. Of course, we all want to dog Excel, but we use Excel probably more than anything else out there. But that said, you have to get the data from somewhere. And I think about, and especially where I walk in, where I was talking about the small businesses, when I come into a business and they've got their off the shelf accounting package that they bought, some developer, maybe somebody they hired 2 years ago and has left a picture, has some tool that they use that's just completely in a silo that helps onboard customers or something. And there is data in there, but it doesn't talk to anything else. Or the one I love is even in more mid-sized businesses, you may have a CRM out there that when you bring in a customer, you get all their information, their contact information, what their source was, and maybe even their billing information, whatever you load in that CRM, and then you win the customer, and then you start over in the accounting system or the project management system, and you don't even take that data and apply it in there. So one of the first things I do that I love to do is look at from just the very first customer or prospect or lead touch, go all the way that far to the left, see what data we're getting there, and see how we can pass it through. And if you can't, it depends on the maturity of the system. If you don't have a lot of in-house development resources and data resources, maybe you are dealing with siloed information, and maybe you're sort of making your own, halfway data lake or data warehouse, and it's really just a bunch of tables that you can query and get different information. But I think you have to start with the information audit and know what's out there. And then you can sort of, as you get the technology and the expertise in-house, you can look at APIs or ODBC connections or whatever it is to have these systems talking to each other. And then you've got kind of the database schema, what you've got in each application, and then you can start using that data. So it's funny, if you ask me about automation, I immediately start talking about data because they're so linked. And so, linking the systems, getting the automation, getting the data, it's all part of the same digital evolution. So they all kind of have the same answers, but it is very important, if you're going to go down the road at all to be a data-driven company, that you understand the data you have and how to pass it from system to system, or at least how to query it and get that.
Right, right. So Glenn, there's one question, right? Given that, let's say a business has multiple metrics or data points across different orgs, right? Like the way marketing defines it would be different from what sales define it. How does a CFO wrap around all this data? Like, I mean, different points, but according with respect to their business as well, right? I mean, it becomes a little tricky, right?
It is, and there's the first thing, and it's you're talking about all the points that I hit in every business that I come to, where you talk about, marketing, sales may define something this way, operations may define it this way, and everybody's sort of tracking their own KPIs, and they may all have different sources of truth.
Right.
And that can be a problem if you're trying to consolidate and you have, so then if you're the finance guy and you're trying to report on operations, you're using a different source of truth than they are, then it's going to mess up the KPI, and it's going to look like somebody's, doing something the wrong way. So I think starting principle is democratization of data. So like I said, you identify all that data, you have the database schemas, you know what you have and where you have it. And then I think you have to go top down and say, this is an acceptable metric. We can take information from this system and say that this is authoritative for how long it takes us to install a customer or whatever. And then, but not from this system, because this is, if you don't have them talking. Now, once you have them talking, if you have a true, full ERP that you're using, or you have a true data warehouse situation, and then, but even then you can still have similar information from different sources. So I think that to be a data-driven company, you have to have senior leadership across all the departments, define what those KPIs are together, and build a system that can't be sort of gamed or manipulated by, somebody trying to make their department look better. And that's one of the reasons that I argue finance should be the keeper of KPIs. And everywhere I've been, I've sort of been the owner of that, because I don't have a department I'm trying to protect. I'm scorekeeper for all the departments, and I can be unbiased. I'm not trying to make sales look better than operations or whatever. So I think that there is an impartiality that just kind of comes with the finance function that makes sense for you to be the arbiter of it. But that said, I don't think that the finance person needs to define what these KPIs are for everyone, but they could be the keeper of them.
Right. And shifting gears a little, Glenn, we noticed that you've also written a book on corporate finance, right? Do you want to talk about it a little and what you cover in that?
Sure. The book is called Deep Finance. It's corporate finance in the information age. And the book's about really everything that we've talked about. In the book, I'm making the argument that we as finance people are business intelligence specialists at heart, because we've been analysts for our whole career. We've been looking, if you're doing FP&A, you're building models, and we're using, based on what's out there now, really primitive tools, doing stuff in Excel that you could do in 2 seconds in Python now or something. That what I talk about in the book is I go all the way back through the history of accounting, from earliest record keeping to the beginning of double entry bookkeeping, and then how it kind of just stalled out for hundreds of years. Like, accounting kind of just was what it was. Here's your double entry bookkeeping, and that's how we do it. But then I start talking about the impact technology on the finance and accounting functions. And here's the reason, one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this. I know, looking at what Spendflo does, and there's so many different off-the-shelf software applications out there, I can't think of a single function in finance that I couldn't go Google right now and find an automated tool to help me do it, whether it's expense management, treasury management, accounts receivable, accounts payable, real-time close software. I mean, everything's out there. So think about, as the finance function, if everything you do, first off, if the company thinks of you as a cost center and everything you can do can be replaced by a computer, what does that say about the future of your function? So with all that, I'm saying, how do we redefine what finance and accounting are doing right now? And I'm saying that there's a turf war. You have these data scientists coming in, these business intelligence people, and everybody wants to be on top of this. But I make a strong argument for, if we're not there already as finance people, we need to get our data science chops up. We need to understand R, Python, whatever, all the tools that are out there in the basics of data science. And we need to be the champions for it, because then I argue in the book about how we can move away from this idea where companies think of back office operations and finance as more of a cost center to how are we truly adding value to the organization. And that's how we're going to move the role forward.
Right. No, in fact, I'm going to quote something from the book. You had written, leaders who aren't aware of these opportunities are simply going to be outpaced by competitors willing to adapt to the 21st century and beyond. Do you want to elaborate on that a little?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you look at the business world now, I mean, think of, let's just pick any industry, pick a SaaS industry. So you have, it's great. You have these subscribed customers and you kind of have a guaranteed revenue every month, and your customer acquisition costs and your churn rate. And if you're trying to make decisions as a company and you're just kind of going by feel of, hey, how can we get more customers or how can we keep the customers we have? Well, that's the hunch. You know what worked in the past. But if you're a data-driven company, you can look at the data and you can find correlations. So you may be able to better define who your target market is. Who are you marketing to? Because if I look at first sort of the descriptive statistics of this is what my typical customer looks like. And I know you can go and sort of manually do it and have your, the characters that marketing always does and how they define who your customer types are. Or you could look at the data and say, our typical customer is a business that is between 40 and 44 million in revenue and has this many employees. And so then that helps you refine who you're marketing to. Or more importantly, you may find, I say more importantly, because if you look at customer acquisition cost and how to keep a customer versus bring on a new customer, if you can find things that happen that speak to this customer is about to churn, and then you can do something prescriptive to stop them from churn, then that is a true value. And that is using data to make better decisions. And so if you're in a company that can do that, and think about that compared to the company that's running, we'll call it the old fashioned way, where they don't have this insight and they're just, spamming their customers with emails, telling their customers how great they are or whatever, but it's something that doesn't resonate with them and it's not impacting churn at all. So they're same amount of activity, but they're not getting the results because they're not using the data.
Because there are like a lot of SaaS tools out there to kind of solve for this, right? Like to predict churn, to be able to track churn and things like that. Do you see SaaS as a growth driver for modern finance leaders, Glenn?
But I guess there's two ways I could hear that question. That one would be using SaaS tools that are out there, and the other one would be productizing and selling SaaS tools. So are you referring more to the first way of using the tools that are out there, or the second?
Using of it?
Yeah, so absolutely. And I think to my example earlier, if I think of a function that I need done that I am currently paying someone to do, I can go search the web and probably find a tool that maybe it doesn't 100% automate it, but it 80% does. And if you're trying to find ways to be more efficient and to increase your group's organization value to the organization, and this isn't just in finance, I'm sure it's in every sector. There are tools that are out there now that salespeople are using that automate a lot of what they used to do. There's tools that operations people are, all departments are HR, are using these automated tools. So I think very much, I don't think 10 years ago I would have heard this term, but I can't turn around now or speak at a different conference or talk to a different group of industry leaders without talking about what's in your finance stack. So everybody's talking about it. It's not just, you wish there was a single ERP that was going to do everything for you, but there's not. So to do, in order to do everything, you have to find these disparate systems and be sure they're able to talk to each other. So very much SaaS is just a part of what we do now. And that maybe your top, Fortune 100 companies are not having to rely on it as much because they can develop. But I don't work in companies of that size, obviously, but I bet they're even using a lot of SaaS tools, because why reinvent the wheel if there's already a product out there that does what you need? Right.
And I think there are enough SaaS companies that say used by 70% of the Fortune 100 or the Fortune 50, right? Again, that gives proof that everyone seems to be using SaaS software. Glenn, one thing that I noticed is you emphasize a lot on process optimization, right? Optimizing different processes in finance. How do you think SaaS buying as a process can be made efficient?
The buying process, like when you go and look and see what the tool does, that's all understandable. I think where people run into hiccups is they're concerned that it's not going to integrate properly, whatever system they're using. So I think, it's one sort of the provisioning of the SaaS products. And I think a lot of people have really handled that. It's getting over that hump of convincing the business that you can bolt your product into what they have, and that the integration is not going to be something that's going to pull them away from their job and break things. And, anytime you're putting a new, whether it's a manual process or an automated process, anytime you change something, you run the risk of an operational impact. So, but I think to make it the easiest for SaaS providers, think about what is in that finance stack for the people you're selling to, and then how you'd fit in that. So if you have a product that you're selling to small businesses and you don't have an easy integration with QuickBooks, you're going to have a hard time selling that product. But if you can say, here's a 1-minute video that shows how simple it is to hook our product up to QuickBooks, then you've got the guy who's, maybe not a technology expert, but he sees in a video that he can click some buttons and have it integrated. So I think full integrations, very clean, clear APIs, making the people understand not just what this tool is going to do for them, but how easy it is to implement. I think that's going to help close a lot more deals.
Right. And I think today there's one side, which is the internal process, right? Making that work with the tool and tool work for the internal process I think that becomes the most challenging thing, especially when you want to implement any SaaS software for that matter. Yeah. So I think this is a question just from an overall CFO standpoint, Glenn. ROI versus efficiency, which is a better goal for a CFO?
I like this question because it lets me be a little provocative. As the CFO, I'm always asking people, if they want to do something, especially it's not in the budget, or if they're trying to justify budget, I'm immediately, tell me the ROI on this. And so when I answer this question, I immediately say the ROI doesn't matter. And that's, I'm holding myself to a different standard than they do. But the argument that I use is, and I've written articles about this as well, is the ROI, you can't look at it, because if you were just trying to come up with an ROI on all this automation stuff, you could say, oh, well, if I automate the entering of invoices into our system, then I can eliminate 2 headcount a month, so that's great. But that doesn't do anything to change the thought of finance as a cost center. It is, I'm going to get rid of having to have these people doing mindless data entry work. And, maybe they each cost 50 grand a year or 75 grand, whatever it is. And so I'm going to take that salary, and instead I'm going to apply it to a data scientist who I'm going to put in my organization, an analyst, whatever it is, that I'm going to pay more than I paid both of them, but you're going to get increased value out of it. So we are more efficient. What we're saying is, if all you want is an old-fashioned finance department, we can automate everything, and you can have your books closed in 7 days of the end of the accounting period, and that's what accounting does for you. Or you could make an investment instead of looking at it as an expense and say, we're going to digitally transform our organization, and it makes sense for finance to lead this. So they're going to get more efficient at doing what they used to do, and they're going to turn their attention to providing greater value to the organization. And that's going to be looking not just in finance. And I think you're seeing more and more of this, where a CFO in a lot of situations also becomes the COO. And I think it's because we're starting to have reach into operations and outside of just finance. But if you look at an end-to-end back office operation as all falling under the purview of finance, in the interest of having this better data and information, then it makes sense for the 2 functions to be combined. So maybe 100% efficient at all the old roles of finance. And we're going to take finance to the next level by making finance a strategic partner to the rest of the department heads in the business, that is adding value at those management meetings, adding value at the board meetings, and helping to direct where the company's going, because we've shifted our skill set from backward looking and historical to taking all that data, going from descriptive analytics to predictive analytics to prescriptive analytics, and that we're driving that.
Right. Love that answer, Glenn. Glenn, maybe this is more relevant to the current the economic situation that we're seeing. Maybe what are 2 or 3 things that you're doing or maybe expect CFOs to do in this current economic downturn situation that's happening today?
Yeah, what I'm seeing right now, I think, is, for so long, credit was so loose, money was so cheap, debt was the easiest thing in the world to do for anyone, valued on as little as what stock price evaluations are on. It's just, sure, you can have it because it's cheap money and it's out there, and the banks are leveraging themselves up to the hilt. So there's all kinds of money out there. And then that's not even counting, equity investments that are out there too. And I think that we've been in year after year after year from quantitative easing to just, PE ratios are out of this world. I guess they're adjusting a little bit now, but I think valuations and the availability of money have made business easy for so many of us for the last, I don't know, 3 decades. You look back at the Great Recession, it was nothing but a blip now that we're, and they build us out with trillions and trillions of dollars of quantitative easing. So I think that there was this mentality of just growth at any cost. And it was whether you're a B2C business or you're, internet consumer business, where it's like, we just got to bring on users. It doesn't matter about revenue because we just have to get to this user base to get our valuation. Or if you're a business and you're thinking, oh, we're burning this money, but we see, 3.5 years down the road, we're going to be cash flow positive. And when there's a lot of money out there that other people don't mind investing in you can do that. But I think when you get to this downturn, and a lot of us, I'm pretty old, and I think that as long as I've been in a decision-making standpoint in finance, I've not seen really a tight market and an inflationary market. So I think we have to step back and think growth at any cost is over. We have to start looking at real business fundamentals that we've been able to ignore for a long time. We have to look at those margins, and we have to think about, yes, it'd be great to have this customer because it'd be great to have their logo on our website. But if they're beating us up on margin and we're putting in, this much effort to do it, you have to think about, is it worth it to do that? So you have to think about customer margin, and then you may have a product out there that you've used as a loss leader, but when you really dive in, maybe that product is costing you more money than it's worth. So you have to look at the return on every aspect of what you're doing in a business. So I just think, that old phrase, cash is king, is very important now, because you don't know where it's going to come from if your burn rate, if you're winding down your cash. So all this growth without a thought of margins and without a thought of cash, it's, when they talk about saving for a rainy day, I think we're into that rainy day, that rainy season. We're going to be having to dip into that war chest, but we want to do it smartly, because the companies who can figure this out and remain solvent through this are going to come out stronger on the other side, because it's going to force us, market conditions are going to force us to be more efficient at what we do. So I think focus on margin, focus on conserving your cash, focus on getting your clients to pay faster, focus on things like in SaaS where, how easy it is for customer to pay. What do you need to do to retain the customers you have? What's the margin of the customers you have? Make sure that you are driving the right things to meet what the market is telling you to do.
No, that makes a lot of sense, Glenn. I think even at the CFO Leadership Council event that we were at, Ravichandran started off with the cash is king, and that was super. It resonated. I think it saw an immediate round of applause from everyone, because everyone was able to relate to it. But yeah, Glenn, this was super insightful. I think we had a really nice chat here around how to be a data-driven CFO, right? And I think thank you so much for coming on board. I think we will have a link for the book as well as part of this recording. Thank you so much, Glenn, for taking out the time to do this.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.